Thank you very much for joining us for this very special session. I have the privilege today of interviewing Ms. Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO. Please continue eating while we have this session. We would very much like you to enjoy lunch. And we also hope that you will be able to engage with us in a very interactive discussion. The point of this discussion is for us to have a more intimate discussion than at the general conference, to get to know the issues that Ms. Bokova is really focused on and that personally drive her, and what she really hopes to achieve as the Director General of UNESCO, as well as herself as a person, as a leader in the international education community. So I'm going to keep the introductions rather brief. First, let me say my name is Maysa Jalbout. I'm a non-resident fellow with the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. I'm based here in the United Arab Emirates. I've been in the region for about 7 years. Prior to this, I was the head of the Queen Rania Foundation. And before that, I was the head of education policy at the Canadian International Development Agency. So I've dedicated a fair bit of my career to this subject. And I am extremely privileged to be speaking to Ms. Bokova today because clearly this is an issue that she feels very strongly about and has dedicated a lot of time to since 2009 when she took over the reins of UNESCO. Today we're going to be covering a number of issues, and I'm going to be guided by you as well and your interest in the various subjects that we're going to be talking about. One of the things that we want to cover and give you the chance to be engaged with is to talk about where Ms. Bokova sees the education community both failing as well as has huge opportunities to make progress. So we've heard you this morning talk about the fact that we're less than 700 days away from the education target, the MDGs, and we're not doing as well as we should be, both in terms of progress on access, but as well as quality. And particularly distressing is the fact that aid to education has been declining, and it has really contributed to the education community's goals beginning to stagnate. Strikingly, in 2011, the aid to education dropped from 6.2 billion to 5.8 billion in 2010 for the first time since 2002, and that was double the drop of spending in aid in general. Why do you think that is? Why are we falling short in attracting the kind of aid we need to move our education agenda forward?
Well, thank you very much, Maysa, for this opportunity. And I see here really ministers, educational experts, civil society, business community. There is no free lunch, so please continue eating, but listen to us because I think it's a very important dialogue that we are engaging. You asked the question of where we are failing. And I think before saying that, let me look a little bit on the optimistic side, because I think that we have to recognize the achievements and then to focus also on where we are failing. First, the achievements are big, and we have to recognize that the international community, many countries have made big strides and huge achievements in terms of bigger budgets for education, adopting, respecting laws. Let me just mention Pakistan, which adopted an important law on compulsory and free education starting from 6 to 16. I think it was a huge achievement. Bangladesh achieved gender parity in primary education. A number of African countries are moving very fastly into access of education, free education, enrollment in school. Why I say that we have to start with acknowledging the achievements? Because I think we have to believe that it is doable. And when we believe that it is doable, we achieve also, and we use these opportunities, and we have good results. But at the same time, as you rightfully mentioned, we are failing. We are failing into the marginalized, into the equity in education, to access, to include still these 57 million kids that are out of school. So out of school children are still a huge problem for many countries, including for the emerging economies. For some of the countries that otherwise are middle-income countries, countries that are aspiring to become one of the global players, still out-of-school children is a huge problem. We are failing into the quality of education because of the poor quality of education. And our global monitoring report that we published last year, and this particular global monitoring report we just published and we launched, has really a daunting figures. Figures that show that still 250 million children, young people, irrespective of they have been in primary school or not, they don't know how to read and write. So, as we say in functional terms, they are illiterate. And we are failing also in our commitment, both in terms of in financing, as you mentioned, in our national budget and the international aid. Experts know that countries, if they want to have a good quality of education and to catch up, in the average, we speak about average terms, they have to invest 6% of their national budget into education. In the developing countries, in the least, they have to invest much more. They have to invest 20% of their budget. We know that in some countries this is happening, but it has to be also matched by the commitment of the international community. There are the need in order to achieve education for all, the second Millennium Development Goal, we have to have international investment in education to the amount of 26 billion. This is the money that we don't have it on the table. And on top of that, the international aid is decreasing, as you rightfully said, for the first time in 2011 we see. The reasons, I think the reasons are, of course, the economic crisis. In many of the donor communities, we see that, unfortunately, budgets for international development aid are decreasing. The good news is that there are new donors coming into the global stage, not the traditional ones, new donors that start investing also heavily in education. And I'm speaking, of course, about China, about Korea. We also see a lot of middle-income countries that start to use the self-benefiting funds, as we say, of investing also themselves through the international community, through the United Nations, to improve the quality of education. So I think the landscape is changing. It's a very dynamic landscape that is changing. But we should not lose, I would say, the big picture, the big important objective, that is to keep education on the global political agenda, to put it with more responsibility, because this is where we need, indeed, the engagement of everybody.
Absolutely, that's a very good point. And I think a big part of the focus at this conference is how do we engage the private sector? And you spoke about that this morning. You said that it was important, and other members of the opening panel also spoke about it. But the fact remains that education receives so much less money from the private sector than, for example, the global health education sector. In fact, so much more, 16 times more than the education sector does. So I think many countries are scratching their heads and trying to understand how do they get the private sector involved. Not just at the global level, to finance the global mechanisms, if you will, the frameworks, but how do they work with UNESCO and other organizations to attract more private sector funding that works with their mechanisms, that works alongside government?
I think also this is a very good point. And if you allow me, speaking about health and education, we are not competing. I wouldn't like to see this this debate as competing health, and I'm speaking about maternal health and child mortality, unfortunately, within the United Nations and the Millennium Development Goals probably is lagging behind a lot. And that is why the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, launched 3 years ago the initiative Every Woman, Every Child. And I mentioned this because we were also very much involved in this initiative, putting a very strong link between health and education. We cannot speak only about health without putting the link with the education, because we know that if we educate girls and mothers, and that is why we are so much emphasizing this important aspect of development, sustainable development of any society. Educate a mother, and you have big achievements in health, and also you decrease child mortality. We know that children beyond the age of 5 of educated mothers are 50% have more the chance of survive. We know that when you educate a mother, you educate the whole family. And we have abundance of data also that it has an impact on the overall the health sector. But at the same time, I would agree with you 100% that unfortunately, within the wider, I would say, donor community and the private sector, and 60 times investing more, of course, is something that we want to catch up. We struggle still with this notion that health is simple and education is complicated. And this is not like that, because sometimes health is perceived only as a vaccination campaign, which is, of course, perfectly justified. But seeing education as a long-term investment, including investment in the improvement of health conditions in a single country, is something very important to be understood. And then the wider impact of education, and we published last year, we launched it in New York during the General Assembly session, a very important report by our global monitoring report team saying what is the impact on other development objectives of education. And it has a multiplier effect on environmental protection, on health, on AIDS, preventive role also of education, on HIV, AIDS, and other also endemic diseases. On gender equality, it's a hugely important, I would say, effect of education on gender. So whenever we look on water management, whenever sanitation, wherever we look, the multiplying effect of education is huge. And this is where I think the public sector can step in the private sector can step in very strongly. We speak nowadays that the world is young. We say that one of the biggest challenges in this world is creating jobs, that it's young people. And it's a problem for developing and for developed countries equally. And where we can boost job creation and where we can boost also economic development and social justice, it's once again through education, through skills development, giving the chance of these young people to integrate the markets, having the right match between what is needed for certain markets, what kind of skills are needed for certain markets, and what kind of education we have to give. And this is where our partnership with the private sector is so important. And we have, because we asked what UNESCO is doing, we have a number of extremely, I would say, relevant partnerships with the private sector, for that matter. We have a wonderful cooperation that we started, I mentioned it briefly this morning, with PepsiCo in Myanmar, of establishing a center of excellence for technical vocational training, training teachers, training professionals there, which will have an expanding, I will say, multiplying effect also on the other area. With GEMS Foundation, we work in Lesotho and Tanzania also for educating, training teachers for technical vocational training, just to give a few examples. And I know that here also many representatives of the private sector then maybe can give a good examples also of their engagement. But my appeal to the private sector is, once again, invest in education, because invest in girls' education, invest in the marginalized. invest in skills development, invest in technical vocational training, because this is, I would say, the best investment for the future of your countries, of the communities, of your companies, because this is where then you will take skilled workers, and not only skilled workers, but citizens that know what is at stake when we speak about education for the future.
And I think that that's been heard loud and clear today, and I think that the next step is really in the how, and in the specifics of what would make sense for them to invest in. And I know you're very passionate about girls' education. This is an issue that's very dear to your heart, and it's a major issue for many of the countries that are represented here today. Your global monitoring report has just come out in saying that the poorest girls won't complete primary school until 2086, and that only 38% of countries have achieved gender parity at the secondary level. And we have many examples of how that manifests itself at a regional level. When we know that poverty is a multiplier barrier, so many girls are deeply affected by the fact that they come from poor households. So in fact, it will be another 100 years until all girls in sub-Saharan Africa can make it to junior secondary. By contrast, for the wealthiest boys from the same region, it will only take 37 years. So that's just one example. Here in the Arab region, although to a much lesser extent, we're still seeing barriers for girls to enter education. We're seeing that girls are doing much better once they enter schools. They are actually completing their education at a much higher rate, and many of them are entering post-secondary education. But the barrier then is that they can't use that education to enter the labor market and make a living. So gender inequality is deeply entrenched in almost every region in which you are focused and you're concerned. Where should the international community be focusing in this very serious matter? And how can we be accelerating progress to make sure that girls are able not only to access education, but to benefit from its qualities, from the skills that they gain from it?
You know, Maysa, and you mentioned that girls' education is one of my passions, and I'm a deep believer in the idea that, of course, on one side, gender equality is a matter of human rights, but I would say the best investment a society, a community, a family can make is in investing in the education of their daughters and of their girls. And what you said, the figures that we published recently in our global monitoring report are shocking. I think we want by this to shock and to kind of wake the consciousness of the people. We just launched a very short brief focusing of the global monitoring report only on girls' education just last week with the Women on the Status of Women in New York, speaking about why it is so important, why it is important that girls go to school. And I do believe that we cannot speak about the big, very ambitious goal that the United Nations is putting forward to eradicate extreme poverty by the year 2030, which I hope very soon the United Nations General Assembly will adopt as a strategic goal of the United Nations, if we don't look at girls' education. And we have to focus on why girls don't go to school. Girls don't go to school because of poverty, because they belong to a minority, linguistic or ethnic or religious. They don't go because of stereotypes in some cases. And we have to work with the local communities, with the local leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, and others. In some cases, because they marry early, because they're contaminated with some disease, because they're ostracized because of that, they get pregnant. And because they want to go to safe environments. And I was recently in Pakistan, and I was talking to a panel there, and there was a woman professor who was telling me, it is not right that families don't want to send their girls to school. They want to send them to school, but they want to send them to safe schools. They want to send them to schools where there is a safe environment, where there is a gender-sensitive teaching. In some cases, we need more women teachers. And we are very much focusing in all of these areas to see what are these barriers that prevent girls from going to school so that we can eliminate them and make girls go to school. And I think now that we are speaking also about conflict, we see refugees, we see conflict areas. I will be going next week to Jordan to visit one of our biggest projects in one of the Syrian refugee camps, Zarati camps, to see. And I know that in such circumstances, it is an additional, I would say, challenge in such environments, in such cases, because always the focus is on boys. So if we take all this and put it into the, I would say, the perspective and to the framework of sustainable development, about the future sustainable development goals, I think we need there to put a very strong focus. And I'm very glad that the private sector also is putting more and more of its attention also to girls. And last but not least, I think we have to work with families, communities, but we also have a huge challenge to work with men, to work with fathers, to work with leaders. And that is why I was so happy to participate last week in a global campaign that the Commission on the Status of Women and UN Women is launching, that we are strongly supporting under the slogan, the title of He for She. I think it's very important that we also involve men, parents, fathers, leaders, so that they are committed, they understand, they take the responsibility of why is it important to invest in girls' education.
Now, Your Excellency, you are the Executive Secretary of the Steering Committee for the Global Education First Initiative. And the initiative has been welcomed by UN member states, but there are a lot of questions still around what is it aiming to achieve. Would you be able to share with us your vision for it, and do you foresee it being able to leverage not only more resources, but the attention of political leaders, such as the G20, the G8? How do you merge that agenda with the political agenda?
The Global Education First initiative that the Secretary General launched 2 years ago is a great political advocacy in favor of education. And I would like to give credit to the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, because he's the first Secretary General that put education on the political agenda of the United Nations. Now, being an Executive Secretary of the Steering Committee and as UNESCO very much involved into the developing of the concept, let me just share with you that our ambition was, on one side, to look at the current landscape of what are the educational challenges and how we can leverage this huge political support and momentum. You mentioned G8 and G20, and yesterday the former Prime Minister Tony Blair also mentioned that very strongly. And I can reassure you that we have on many occasions made advocacy with the governments of the G20 countries also to put, and I'm very happy that already there is a broad support, political support for education. But in practical terms, what we have nowadays is the second Millennium Development Goal, education for all. There is unfinished business to be done. And we are making the big push until 2015 to get the maximum out of this momentum so that we get more children in school. The education for all goal, second Millennium Development Goal, was very much focused on access, and justifiably so. In 2000, there were more than 100 million kids out of school. Now we have 57, so there is a momentum. But looking, we talk about our global monitoring report evaluation. Access nowadays is not enough. We have to look at the quality. So quality of education is the second pillar of the Global Education First initiative of the Secretary General. We talk about new technologies. We talk about teachers. We talk about education for sustainable development. We talk about how we move also from the primary education to the secondary education. We look at the bottlenecks. And then the third pillar of Global Education First initiative of the Secretary General is, as we call it, education for global citizenship. We want to make a bridge between the current development goals and the future sustainable development goals. We want to see what kind of young people we want to get out of school. It is not just let's put kids in school, as we call in technocratic language the inputs. We want to see what comes out, what kind of skills they have. That is why we developed the learning metrics yesterday. Rebecca from the Brookings, Winthrop, spoke about it. We worked with them, with UNICEF, to prepare the learning metrics. What is quality education called nowadays? We finished the education learning metrics for the primary school. Now we're moving to the secondary school. But then we speak about values. We speak about human rights education. We speak about peace education. We speak about cultural literacy. There is too much conflict in this world, internal, in different countries. We live in a globalized world. We live in the globalized cities. People are interacting with cultures, with different ethnicity on a daily basis. We have to have young people knowledgeable about each other, knowledge about this huge cultural diversity in the world, and it should start in schools, on the school benches. We need protecting of environment. We speak about changing our behaviors in terms of climate change, in terms of sustainability, the biodiversity. All this starts in school. And that is why we believe that with the Global First initiative, we have set the ground for this debate about what should come after 2015, and to make a bridge between education for all, bring the unfinished business into the picture, and move forward.
In fact, that's a great segue into my question. And as soon as we're finished this exchange, I'm going to open it up for questions from you. So please be prepared to ask whatever questions you may have. I know that there's always a danger of oversimplification, and that we're accused in the education community of sort of putting too many goals on the table. I know for example, in the Learning Metrics Task Force, I'm sure many of you here were involved, the education community put something like over 70 learning metrics that they wanted children to be measured against. And it's not necessarily saying one is more important than the other, but you as Director General of UNESCO, you must have a vision of where you want to see the post-2015 agenda go. And if you had your choice of one goal that you wanted to see put on the table, and that you would sort of say, this has been a successful process, what would that look like?
It's a very tricky question. Because, as you know, being a Director General of UNESCO, we have on our plate also important areas which are very much linked to education equally. I mean, I'm speaking about biodiversity, speaking about education for sustainable development, about culture, about intercultural dialogue. But still, what I think we will achieve, speaking strictly about education, I really believe that we have to have a good match of three issues. We have to have access. We have to give the opportunity. Education should be recognized as a public good. It is not a charity. Education is not a charity. Education is a public good. It is a foundation of empowerment of every single human being. As this morning President Clinton said, human intelligence is equal everywhere. Human talent is equal everywhere. We just have to unleash it. We just have to give the opportunity to every single boy and girl, be it in a poor environment, in a poor community, whether it's a boy or a girl, to unleash this potential. we speak about rising inequalities in the world, globally, and in different societies. And President Clinton, by the way, mentioned also this morning rising inequality in his country and also in some of the, as we call the developed, the rich countries. Education is, I would say, the most important empowerment, the most important instrument of social mobility. Because without education, using this, I would say, engine, a lift into the ladder of inequalities, it is education providing it. So I would like to see this recognition of education as providing sustainability all across the board. If the future goals are not the classical development goals, but universal, sustainable for all humanity, then education should be there probably as the primary objective, because this is about economic development, about competitiveness, about innovation, about social inclusion, about human rights, about gender equality, about protecting the environment, and about sustainability on a global level. So I really hope that it will be put with all its varied dimensions, with all the responsibility of political leaders on the future global development agenda.
I think that we could classify that as a success if that happens, for sure. You'll have no disagreement, I'm positive, from anyone here in the room. And with that, I wanted to open the floor to a couple of questions from anyone who is interested in either following up on the questions that I've asked Ms. Bokova here today, or has a different question. If we could have the mic available, please. Yes, please. I'll take another one as well, if somebody else is ready. Please let us know your name and which organization you're from. Okay, cool.
I'm Judy Boychuk, and I work with Abu Dhabi Education Council as a principal of a girls' school, actually a government school here in Elaine. But my question is more of a personal interest about the situation in Syria and Jordan and fallout into Turkey and certainly in Lebanon. And I'm wondering what the United Nations, you mentioned you were going to Jordan, and what the United Nations is doing for these young men and women that have been out of school for years. Because my experience of visiting the camp recently is that there is absolutely no education going on in those refugee camps in Jordan.
Well, it's indeed a human catastrophe. We know what happens in Syria and around in the neighboring countries. Let me just say that we at the United Nations are very much mobilized to focus also on education, among other, of course, humanitarian concerns that we have. And I attended the Kuwait conference mid-January, organized by the state of Kuwait and the United Nations. It's a pledging conference to tackle this crisis. And we launched there with the UNICEF, with the High Commissioner for Refugees, with the European Union Commission, UNESCO, and other partners, the No Lost Generation initiative. Because we, and I believe I can share your concerns entirely, that the upside of what happens in Syria, apart from the other humanitarian disaster, is just hundreds of thousands of young people, Syrians, at the different levels. We speak about kids not going to school, the primary. We speak about a secondary school, lacking of secondary school also facilities. And we speak also about students in high school. So it's all across the education spectrum that there might be a lost generation of Syrians. And I would say that taking also into account the spillover effect of this situation, and having in mind also children in other conflict areas that are not going to school. We know that out of the 57 million kids not going to school, 37 are in conflict areas. So there is a big, I would say, a huge millions of children not going, and it becomes a security issue for many countries. Now, We at UNESCO, we have been making a huge advocacy for a long time that education is considered as part of the humanitarian response in such situations. Unfortunately, only 2% of all the humanitarian assistance goes to education, which is not acceptable for us, because education is what brings normalcy, what brings back also the kids also to school, and has a multiplying effect also for the future. If we miss, a child misses a year, 2 years, 3 years in school, it becomes a liability also for the future development of the country. Now we are very much focusing on working on Syrian refugees. I know maybe that this is not enough. On one side, we have refugees in camps, and I will go to visit one of our major projects that we're working also for teacher training in the Zahrati camp in Jordan. But we know also the pressure of refugees in Lebanon, in Iraq, in other countries where they're not particularly in camps. So we are trying to help, we're working with the governments, with the local communities also in Lebanon, in Iraq, in order to see how we can integrate these kids into the national systems. The questions about curricula, a big issue about what curricula these children are learning. The questions about the secondary education. What we are doing also with the youth engagement generally, I would say. We don't want to see these young kids then that fall prey to extremism in many of these circumstances. So how we use this, I would say, opportunity to make advocacy for education with the donor community is extremely important. And I'm pleading also with the private sector, because the private sector in many of these cases should be interested in helping governments, helping the international community provide education for these young people.
I couldn't agree more, and I think with 2 million Syrian children out of school and with the low level of budgetary support that was received both in Kuwait and after that, there could be no stronger plea made towards the private sector getting engaged and contributing to where governments have not. Could we take one more question? And then I'm afraid we've run out of time very, very quickly. Yes, please, go ahead.
I'm Swati Sharma, Australian, but Indian origin and working in India. One of the poorest state of India, Orissa. I know that quality education and skill development is a universal challenge, and there is a mismatch between the education provided and skills required. There are so many private sectors, and I understand that at some point the quality will be compromised. But in the skill sector, it is working really very well. So do we have to draw a line somewhere for the private sectors where the quality won't be compromised if they enter? And if they don't, how to deal with the problem where kids are not even having one-time meal and they just can't think of going to the school?
Thank you. Could I take another question and then give Ms. Bokova the chance to answer?
I'm Elise Bijon from the United Nations World Food Programme. So before I ask my question, I just wanted to come back on your question, because just to reiterate the idea that you have education curriculum established in those refugee camps. I was in Zaatari camp in June last year. I spent a whole day in a classroom where we are actually distributing school meals as part of an integrated UN response to make sure that those kids continue to receive an education and have a future. So just actually coming back on the school meals, could I have your take on the role of school meals and take-home rations and food in general to boost school enrollment and attendance, and would you advocate an integrated approach in that sense?
Well, I think both are good questions. Responding to the first question, I think this is where the role of the government and I would say the responsibility of governments come. Local governments and central governments in different settings. The quality of education should not be compromised. I believe setting standards for education, be it in the public sector or in the government, because let me say that there are different, in different parts of the world, there are different, I would say, examples. There are countries where the private sector provides, in many cases, high quality education than the public. But there are very many settings where the public sector provides higher education than the private. Just to mention one such example, I'm speaking about Haiti because President Clinton spoke about Haiti, and he being also the special envoy of the Secretary General at that time, and I know we are working together there in Haiti. In Haiti, the private sector is more than 60% of all the education activities in the country. Probably this is the only example where the public sector takes a lower, I would say, share of the education. And this doesn't mean that the private sector has higher quality, on the contrary. And there is no strict, I would say, control. So this is where the governments have to step in and have to set a very clear quality assurance systems of what comes out of the private sector also. And coming to the second, I think it's very, very important. And I could also commend FAO and the way also we work with the other agencies, with the Food Program and the others. I think that this shows that we at the United Nations working in synergies, we can achieve more results. The questions about providing food in schools, and we are having very many such projects. You know the problem with the stunting, and I think it's extremely important that when kids get a breakfast in school or a lunch in school, of course they can learn. If they don't get it, they cannot learn. If we provide a breakfast or a cup of milk or a lunch in school, then families send them to school. It is an additional initiative also, an incitement of encouragement of families to send kids to school. So the multiplying effect of combining all these efforts that we are making are extremely important. In fact, we launched last year during the Davos Economic Forum a new initiative with UNICEF and with the World Food Program, Nourishing Bodies, Nourishing Minds, putting the two important issues together, feeding kids and sending them to schools and learning. I think this is the way we can also provide education and development, I would say, human development, physical, emotional, and also, I would say, educational of these kids.
Wonderful. Now, Your Excellency, you started our conversation by saying that it's critical to focus on the positive. And I completely agree with you. I think focusing on the positive, whether it's seeing a greater number of children in school or seeing a new partnership emerge or learning results going up, those are all very critical. I'm wondering, as the first female sector, executive director or director general of UNESCO, and someone who's very passionate about girls' education, if you think that that is an area we can be positive about. In fact, one of the things that has been heartening for the education community is to see a new group of voices being added to our global advocacy. And one of them has been Malala. And I know you're working very closely with her. And we all say that empowering girls is so critical to advancing the girls' education agenda. Could you tell me if you think this is a promising development and if it's something that we can really leverage going forward?
As I said, I'm a deep believer that girls' education is one of those areas which I would say we can achieve a positive results and quite successful in the span of a short time. What is important, I think, in this particular area, you mentioned Malala. And Malala, I think it's an embodiment of challenges around girls' education, but also, I would say, opportunities that girls' education provide. Malala was very strongly supported by her father. And I have discussed with her father many times, and I have listened to her father making passionate speeches, not prepared speeches, at the very beginning of I would say, of being notorious in the world, of saying why he considered that his daughter, when it was important that his daughter went to school. I think this is very important. Then I would say Malala is not alone. I have met many other courageous girls and boys also, which is very interesting, who are defending brothers, who are defending the right of their sisters also to go to school. And very many courageous girls in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, who have been attacked, who have been harassed, who have been threatened, but still they continued going, and their families. And yesterday, it was a moving also testimony that we heard from this young Afghani woman that had been threatened by the Taliban of not going to school. So I believe these examples are wonderful of courage, of conviction, and also of a value, of a family value. We have to, on one side, make the big advocacy. We have to convince governments. We have to convince political leaders. We have to convince the business community also to invest in girls' education. We have to work, to continue working with traditional leaders. We have to work with religious leaders. We have to work with families. We have to work with fathers, because I think in many of these settings, this is critical in order to get girls into school, and then making this safe environment. The very fact that we are having this conference, speaking about the positive, the optimistic side, the very fact that we have this major conference, this major advocacy, the very fact that we are discussing already the details about education and how we move forward, the very fact that we have such a wonderful attendance, a community of ministers, of educators, of private sector, of committed people, speaking with one voice and focusing on what is most important, I think it is a huge success. And let me really give credit to James Foundation, Varkey James Foundation, a wonderful partner with whom we partner on concrete projects. We work on the ground in Africa. But big believers, and I see here also big believers in education and these public-private partnerships. I think we are going deep and we are going global. And after this conference, I think we all are coming. I attend many conferences. But every time, and particularly in this time, this conference, we are coming with new ideas. We're coming with much more conviction that it can be done. And I know it can be done. It can be done if we put our minds and our hearts where we have to put it. And out of this conference, I think I'm confident there will be many partnerships that will come between governments and the private sector, between the United Nations, us. I just signed such an important agreement with Samsung. We are expanding our partnership in education. We are expanding our partnership in the areas of our focus. I'm sure that multiplying this partnership will bring about success.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy day to have this informative discussion. I'm cognizant of the fact that you still have to eat because you still have a very busy day ahead of you. So I want to stop here. Thank you for everything you do for the education community. Your passion and your commitment are felt through this discussion and through all of your work. And thank you very much for choosing to have lunch with us. I hope the food was good. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.